Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. We got a real treat for you today. We're going to be talking about ethical innovation and how to keep your program moving. The only constant in this world is change, and if we're not changing and adapting, then we are going to turn into vestigial programs that no one pays any mind to and that doesn't have any impact in the organization. So as we get started, hello, see, we got a new angle here. We just keep upgrading around here. So as we get started, as always, drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And you have to take advantage of this amazing community that we're all a part of. This is our place to come every Thursday. You know, we all have hard jobs. We're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, and we can get together with like-minded people who believe that changing our workplaces can change our world. So drop your LinkedIn into the LinkedIn URL in the chat. Connect with one person today. Thank you all for the Ethicsverse survey. I know I say this every week. This is the last week, okay? Last week, so get those last minute comments in on how we can make this thing better. Some great suggestions in there. I appreciate that. You know, we want to make this, we take very seriously the hour you spend with us each week, and we want to make this as good as possible. Speaking of as good as possible, look at all of these resources that are out there. So we have the one and only Hema on here today. How's it going, Hema? Hema hosts my favorite podcast, the Great Women in Compliance podcast. Every week they have phenomenal conversations. I sound smarter after listening to it, and you could too. So check that out. A lot of great resources out there. We, of course, are giving away stuff because we don't even like making money around here. We just like giving away books. So check this QR code out. You can see all the books in the Ethico library. Open to suggestions of more. We are always trying to stock this library up with more books and more things. Speaking of more books, the FCPA Survival Guide is flying off the shelves at every Amazon I've talked to. Every Amazon delivery guy I ask, have you heard anything about this? And he says, yeah, they're just flying off the shelves. So if you have not checked this out, I encourage you to do it. Tom Fox, genius, the voice of compliance, wrote this book, FCPA Survival Guide, 10 massive takeaways from several recent cases. We've also turned that into an award-winning, from my mother, award-winning podcast series, 10 parts. Check that out on YouTube. Also, people are going nuts about this. So about a week ago, the Ethico marketing team, because we love you so much, put out this phenomenal middle managers toolkit. This is packed with tons of resources so that you can kind of take this off the shelf and implement it into your program to start activating this really critical group, these ethical leaders, these ethical managers who really can echo your song across the organization and really help to crowdsource that risk intelligence and get you more points of risk to provide insights at. So if you've not checked that out yet, hit this QR code. And if you think there are some other resources that would be valuable for us to add, shoot us a note and we can create those. This is our battleground. If you look at these statistics here, people are 6 to 8 times more likely to come to their local manager, their direct manager with something wrong, whether that's a fraud, waste, abuse, policy violations, ideas for improvement. And yet the average, if you look at the NAVEX report, 1.5 reports, the Ethico report, kind of 3.6 reports, that's a tiny bit of the risk intelligence that's floating throughout the organization. And the ethics and compliance department in particular has the ability to be that circulatory system to grab that risk intelligence into the central brain and do something about it. So check that out. We'd love some feedback on it. Speaking of that central brain, check out the Ethico ecosystem. This is a next-gen tool that helps you engage more stakeholders in your ethics and compliance program, consistently manage that risk, mitigate that risk efficiently, and ultimately prove the effectiveness of your program with an authentic culture of compliance. So this is your basis for it. If you haven't checked it out, hit us up. We have a nice no pitch zone type demo so you can see what some of the, if you're thinking about changing and picking the lock on that handcuff to the radiator that you have and looking at something new, check that out. We are giving away Higher Ground. So I'm about done with this for my second time. Love this book. Love Allison Taylor. She was on last week. If you have not checked this book out, then you should buy it, or you should just be really participatory in the chat today. So the 5 best comments, 5 best tips, all that kind of stuff is going to get entered into the drawing for 5. Free year of service, wrapping this up. This is just for Ethicsverse members now. So yet another reason to subscribe to the Ethicsverse. Oh yeah, it's free, by the way. All right, I'm going to pass this over to the coolest guy in compliance, the one and only Matt Kelly. How's it going, Matt?
Very good, Nick. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So today, as Nick said, we're going to talk about improving your compliance program. And I specifically wanted to focus in on remediation challenges of your program. And this came to me when there was a large bank recently, which shall remain nameless here, but is one of the largest banks in the United States and in the world. They were recently fined by banking regulators for a second time for not yet implementing a previous consent order from 4 years ago to improve their regulatory compliance and internal controls. And there was a whole big program. I wrote up a whole big series about it in Radical Compliance. 4 years later, they still hadn't done it. And so that was the genesis of today's session here, where we want to talk about, okay, why is it challenging to move your compliance program forward, especially if you have already agreed to something in some sort of a resolution? And how much is this a problem of getting the rest of the enterprise to pay attention to what they're supposed to do? How much is it a problem of actually tracking what they're doing and making sure that things are moving forward? I want to talk about all sorts of questions like that. So to help us with that, we have first Hema Lomax is here. And Hema has been on many times. She is has been a head of compliance at Zendesk, at Disney, at Snap. Hema, great to have you back again.
Thank you.
And also with us is Ali Ikram, who had been a longtime SAP compliance executive until earlier this year. And most recently, he was Chief Operating Officer for the Ethics and Compliance function at SAP. So Ali, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
And I guess I wanted to start with a very broad sort of curtain raiser question. I'll put it maybe to Ali first, and then Hema, and then Nick. Like, why do you think compliance programs do struggle so much to make forward progress on improvements? And I know everybody's going to say something like, well, first we have to strive for consensus. And I promise we will talk about striving for consensus and relationships and whatnot later on in the hour. But I'm thinking more about specific obstacles that any large organization might encounter, like this large investment bank. I sometimes think that companies just struggle to get out of their own way to do improvements. But, Ali, I'll start with you again, and then Hema, and then Nick. What's your big take on what the choke points are?
So I think for me, Matt, it really, like you said earlier, it really is about consensus. But before we go there, it's important to first identify and understand what needs to be done. And what I mean by that is identify those critical stakeholders that are needed for the improvements inside your organizations. Where are those people? What are those departments? And who is senior enough to exert the necessary influence over the change that's needed? Then after you have meetings with them, you'll be able to identify, who are the proponents to affecting the changes that you need, and then start establishing those relationships and work with them to come up with win-win plans. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a sort of a journey that will take weeks, probably months, but you need to have sort of that sort of approach at the end of the day.
Okay. Hema, what would you say?
Oh, I love this question. And I'm going to take your challenge not to talk about togetherness for a second. And we're going to go straight to the guts of it, which is control what you can and take some responsibility, right? As a compliance officer. What do I mean by that? You're not wrong that you need to build relationships, and that should be a good intention. But how are you going to actually operationalize that intention? What can we do differently to push the needle here? Because I think you quite rightly identify whether beginning as a startup trying to create a compliance function or somebody that's had a big problem that's trying to remediate, we're having problems. There's something going wrong here. So we've got to get to the source of what that is. I like to think of what I'm selling. Like what am I selling as a compliance officer? Am I selling or demanding cooperation? Am I selling fear? Am I coming at you with things that need to be done yesterday? Or am I asking myself how I'm going to actually work together with these other people? Or how am I going to incentivize that? So think of it as a rebranding. I've been known as the Office of No and the Office of Block. How can I turn that into being the Office of Unlock? What really are the common objectives when it comes to the sales teams, the IT teams, the HR teams? What are we there to do? And how do we do that together? So one of my favorite phrases, apart from being the Office of Unlock, is together we can do hard things well. But we need to really think about the motivators of human behavior, the prompts, the things that will prompt people to actually get things done, as opposed to just talking about it, making commitments. And Matt, many of these corporations that have made commitments to get things done, whether 4 years ago or not, they want to get it done, but they just can't figure out how. So I would challenge us as compliance officers to control what we can. And part of that is our brand and what we're selling. part of the way we can control others is to think about what motivates others. And fear does not motivate others for very long. But thinking about the impacts of not having a compliance function on our business plan, our business objectives, our sales is much more powerful than a potential of another regulatory intervention years down the line. So I would say focus on the common objectives. That's how you bring people along. Then remember, you have to do it together. You don't get to sit in your office and tell people what to do. I know we're going to get into this, specific examples, whether it's IT or others, but there are ways to motivate an IT team to work with you that don't involve you just telling them, need this done now, new tool, let's go.
I'm not trying to be the umpire here, but there was a little togetherness in that answer right at the end. So you did really great until right at that last sentence.
We'll get to the togetherness. It's important.
It is important. I mean, Ali and Hema both said this magic word, which is influence. And at the end of the day, we need that sort of, voluntary participation of people in order to get anything done that's meaningful. Hema, you used this word prompt, and it was I was working on this presentation I'm doing at SCCE, and it's all about leveraging AI for like data analytics in compliance. And there's a whole section about prompt, and it's just like fresh in my mind. And I think that's a really strong word because just like you give a prompt to an AI and it does something for you, we're giving prompts out to the workforce all the time. We're giving prompts out to our counterparts and all that stuff. And we can control that prompt, and that prompt is going to have some kind of influence on that person and the actions that they end up taking, to your point. And so when we understand that human nature and we understand, like you said, those common business objectives, we're able to, through a conversation, through an investigatory, interaction, really reveal more of like what might be below the surface to help get that unlocked. I would say, though, I think like macro, high level, the thing that we struggle with the most is, maybe it's like perfectionism, maybe it's like a fear of getting off the porch. And I just think like, we've all heard this 100 times, don't let perfect be the enemy of good or perfect be the enemy of good enough. I just think like at some level, you just have to start doing motion. You just have to start doing action. Like actions create information for you. Actions create data. And, so many times you have this massive plan, the best laid plans of mice and men, and then you bring it to the streets, or you bring it out into the, into reality, and it kind of falls flat for some reason because something you didn't consider or whatever. So maintaining that agility and letting go of this idea of perfection and rather shifting toward improvement, continuous improvement of just kind of shaving it, shaving down the edges and like, pushing the program forward a bit. I think that is very freeing, and it allows for a much faster feedback loop of what's working, what's not working, to allow you to move faster and more effectively.
So here's a good comment from one of the listeners, and where they say, I think sometimes we must remember to first seek to understand. And sometimes I think we come to the table with a solution without fully understanding the potential operational challenges to it. Now, that speaker is right, but I am wondering, like, maybe if you could all talk about how right they are, because I do see that you must seek to understand, and you can't just waltz in saying we're going to do it this way. On the other hand, you can't take forever. That investment bank hadn't executed in 4 years, and finally regulators swoop back in for a second punch at them. So I'm trying to map out, especially if you do have a settlement that is driving your remediation, how do you get through that learning process? Or how does the compliance officer come in to seek to understand, but still has to tacitly convey, and we have to understand all this within 2 months because we have a report we need to make to regulators by Q3 or something like that. Let me ask Ali and then Hema and then you, Nick, as well. Like, what do you think about how to map out all of that and what this listener is saying?
I'm fully on the same page as all of you guys. I think, the iterative changes like Nick's alluding to and has said are so critical because you need that forward momentum. If you say, and I like to always use the analogy of building cars, and I've never built a car. I think none of us on this call have built a car before, but sometimes compliance professionals or just people in general, we want to build the Lamborghini the first round. And that doesn't make sense.
Right.
I mean, what we need to do is learn to accept. And in the old days, I always used to say, let's start by building a Ford Focus. Ford Focuses aren't built anymore, but let's start with a base model, right? And then build upon that, because getting to that base model is something that you will be able to rally others behind. getting to a minimal viable product, for instance, with an IT organization is something that they will be okay with as a starting point. And then that also helps from the perspective of having a quick win or something that you can demonstrate that this organization can, collaborate and get together for the future success. So that journey is really, really important. And then you will get from the Ford Focus to, maybe a mid-sized car to ultimately a sports car, but give it that journey.
Emma, what would you say?
I am fully team #seek to understand. I scrolled up to see it was Dawn, I think, Dawn Geiser that said it. To answer your question, Matt, you will slow yourself down if you don't seek to understand. So this idea of seeking to understand is going to take time. You know what's going to take time? Not seeking to understand. I guarantee you that. That's going to slow you right down. I can actually, Ali, you said something. They don't even build that anymore. Yeah, you're going to build a car they don't even build anymore. That's what you're going to do if you rush into just, activity for activity's sake. Somebody else in the comments, I think it was Divya, talked about impact. And the SEC and the DOJ, I used to work at the SEC for 10 years prosecuting these cases. I can't speak for them, but I can tell you they're looking for impact, not activity. They really want actual impact, number one. The other thing we know that they want is root cause analysis, which to me is a synonym for seek to understand. And so if you can understand what's happening and why, you're going to be much faster. It's an accelerator, in fact. I want to go back to your original question. What about how we get things done? The only way you can get things done with other people, the togetherness, is to seek to understand, is to have radical empathy, compassion, curiosity. At the most basic level, no one's going to be able to do the thing you need to get done if they've already spent their budget or they've already got their own OKRs or plans this year. So you need to think about that stuff. Again, the government, it's not about the government, but let's just talk to them for a second. They're looking for a reasonable good faith effort, a journey, a roadmap. They didn't say get there today. They said show us that you care enough to try to get there for tomorrow and sustainably. And so if we're thinking in terms of sustainable good faith efforts and journeys, we are going to want to seek to understand to get in the right vehicle, the right direction, at the right speed. Right? Do not think that activity alone is going to get you anywhere. And maybe, I'm just going to guess now, I'm going to hazard a guess, maybe that is the reason that people are recidivists, because they think they can use the same old things faster and louder and longer and stronger, and it just doesn't work.
Okay. Nick, jump in, because I'm hearing a tug of war here between, people are right to say we need to understand things, but at the other hand, you can't take forever to understand. There has to be some forward progress. What are your thoughts about how to walk that fine line?
So I don't know how you drive any change that's meaningful without getting buy-in. And I haven't had success in my own life, in business or at home or whatever, where I just jerk the wheel and I just say, here's a new change. The number one thing, maybe not the number one thing, after you watch that horrific video in Driver's Ed where, there's a really sad song playing and everyone's crying because they're seeing all these horrific accidents. They talk about signaling our intention, right? You have to use that turn signal before we change lanes. And I think you can signal your intentions or through conversations with folks and get some input from them. So there you can seek to understand, you can go to somebody and say, hey, we kind of have this problem. We're thinking about doing this. We don't want to drive this change and not really understand what the externalities of it could be. How would you go about doing this? How would you go about achieving it? And in that, you're going to be bringing them into the process. You're going to be signaling that this change might be coming. You're going to open up the possibility to perhaps, seek to understand and find something that you didn't know. And I just think that signaling of a change allows for a much higher adoption rate of that change, particularly when people know that it's coming and they've at least had some kind of a conversation about it. So, I mean, it's not really a silver bullet, but I just think you have to be able to bring people into the decision, and you have to, at least stack the deck in your favor to perhaps find some, data points or some insights that you maybe didn't consider on your kind of first draft or first sketch of the plan.
Okay, here's a really good suggestion from one listener here. Document the strategic plans when building your compliance program or solving for a consent order or something like that. So actually, I suppose I should even stop and take a step back and kind of explore that how does the compliance officer, even before you go and start to learn to understand, you document for yourself, kind of like a written record. Here's what I know I'm going to have to achieve in 3 years at the end of our DPA or whatever. How much should you do that, or what kind of legwork or putting it down on paper do you do to make sure the compliance program itself knows this is the fixed point on the horizon? I don't know how we're going to get there, but we have to get there at the end. Like, what would you say about that? Ali, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a key point, actually, Matt. Like, at the end of the day, you've got, let's say, back to a DPA, that 3-year time horizon, right? And what your agreement with the regulators says needs to be done, right? It's not maybe necessarily extremely prescriptive, but it's giving you sort of a North Star. So both the chief compliance officer of the organization and his or her team, as well as, honestly, the audit or the compliance committee of the company should be like jointly working together so that after that settlement takes place, there is agreement. Okay, this is what we're tackling in terms of a problem for 3 years from now. And then we're going to track against the progress. It also builds the consensus amongst that group about what needs to be achieved. But then, organizations like an audit committee or a compliance committee also have something to hold the chief compliance officer and the compliance organization and the rest of the company to, in order to achieve that objective.
Okay, so now let me pick up on that and ask Hema and Nick as well, because I kind of thought maybe that's where you could go. You have to say, we know that in 3 years we have to be here. And therefore now I can kind of reverse engineer the steps that, we'll have to revamp our IT system, or we'll have to change this policy. And then you can kind of figure out, now if I know this has to happen, now I can go forth and learn to understand the constraints and challenges. Like, am I thinking through this the right way to sort of start with the end and work backwards to figure out your path forward? Emma, what would you say to that?
So look, I absolutely think you need to have some kind of goal in mind. But this togetherness is kicking its way in like a hungry toddler, right? It's like,
bring it
in,
bring it.
Yes, you want to have a goal, but I'm cynical. I'm like, do you really trust Matt's goal? Come on. Matt came up with this himself, right? Let's just think about this for a second. Again, strategize for impact, not outcomes, not activity.
So good.
The idea that the SEC told you to get X things done in 3 years and it needs to be done it's just not true. As Ali said, it's not prescriptive like that. They're actually telling you to do a sustainable thing that lasts well beyond the 3 years. Go figure, right? And so you're going to have to. How do we do that? Like, we don't plan our lives for 3 years without knowing that we have to bring some togetherness in, strategize what's operationally practical, what's feasible, what's reasonable, what's doable. How are we going to pivot when we made a mistake? Can you plan for mistakes? You're going to have to plan for some failure. Plan for the tool isn't available or it breaks. Like, it can't just be the tool will be in place. It will be, what do we want by way of impact when it comes to bringing in tooling? And you might have to pivot. You might have to go back to spreadsheets to get the thing done, quite frankly. Just because, IT might be stuck with their budgets and their people and layoffs and what have you. So I think goals for sure, we all know, have goals, but I'm going to say strategic impact. Document a plan for strategic impact. Make it a draft. Let it be a living, breathing document that you can continue to iterate on. Use that as a framework to get input. Co-create. That's the togetherness. Co-create it. If you want, and Nick knows I talk about this all the time, if you want buy-in, have somebody, create 2/3 of the plan with you. Then they're already sold on it. If I ask you, Matt, is this feasible? What in your experience might work to tap off this vulnerability, to make us less vulnerable, at least in year one, that's not perfect, but your team can tolerate? You'll come up with something brilliant, much more brilliant than me. And when I come back to you next week and say, hey, Matt, how are we going to implement this? You got any ideas, resources? You'll throw them at me. But if I come to you in week 2 with my document and it's written, and I'm sorry, Matt, it's got to be done. Government said so. Goodbye. Good luck with that, Hema. I'm not going to get Matt to move. Go on, Nick. Sorry.
Oh, no. It's so good. You used 2 of my favorite words in these kinds of conversations: how questions, what questions. When you use a how and a what question with an adversary, someone who you're trying to convince, you make your problem our problem. This is our problem. And when you said, hey, how can we actually implement this? What do you think the impacts of this are going to be? Well, now he's not on the other side of the table. He's on your side of the table. And you are, to your point, collaborating on this plan together. You're co-creating that plan. That is like implicit buy-in. With respect to like how do we move forward and so forth. You know, my brother has talked about this ABZ framework. We're at A, we want to get to Z. That can be very overwhelming. That's 25 or 26 jumps if I do the quick math. We really just need to think about the next step to B. If we can stay in that kind of a mode, we're not going to get overwhelmed with this massive mountain we're trying to climb. We're just going to put one foot in front of the other. I was reading a little story to my daughter the other day. I forget the name of it, is like The Boy in the Woods or something. So this boy and this horse are in this scary wood and they can't see anything. And the boy's like, I don't really know where to go. I don't know how to get out of this. And the horse says to the boy, well, can you see your next step? And he said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, just take that. And that just like resonated with me so much because like there's all this complexity that we're trying to juggle. There's all these projects and plates that we have spinning. And it's so overwhelming to feel like, how do I get all the way to Z? Well, you don't. You just have to get to that next step. Just do that next step. Have that next conversation. Do that next collaboration. And I think those steps start to really stack up. And the progress, when you're focused on impact, like Hema said, that's just going to be kind of inevitable.
I'm listening through some of the reader feedback here. A lot of people talking about do as much as possible to understand the resource constraints. Hema, I loved your point about anticipating when you're going to fail, because you will, and gets to one of my favorite sayings that a audit committee member told me once, that I'm not interested in the business continuity plan per se. I'm interested in that teaches the team how to make plans on the fly, which is more important than the actual plan. Stuff like that comes around up and up. I guess, I wanted to shift gears a little bit to something a little more tactical for compliance officers, is how to basically collect the information that you need to understand what is going on. And these really get to be about IT silos. You're probably, a compliance officer is going to need to deal with multiple IT silos across your enterprise. Some of them are going to be legacy systems. They're going to give you the data, but it won't fit neatly with other types of data you also have. And you're stuck compositing a complete picture of what's going on. How challenging is that? And how does a compliance officer think through how to overcome just these basic information IT silo challenges? Ali, what's your experience been with that kind of headache?
From my perspective, and before I started working in compliance, I came from a risk management and auditing background. So for us, I feel compliance people really need to go back to good old risk management. And we know risk management is really important, for assessing the landscape of our operations in a company, but it should be the same for coming up with solutions. What do I mean by that? Like, let's say you've got a problem in terms of systems not talking to each other on the revenue side of a company, and it's got 15, 16 subsidiaries on many disparate revenue reporting systems. You're not going to say, I'm going to tackle all of those subsidiaries at once. I think it makes sense to assess where is the greatest source of risk, where's the greatest source of materiality in all of those subsidiaries, and then work with IT and the business to say, can we tackle these riskiest areas first, these more material areas first? 9 times out of 10, I can tell you, when you're having those conversations with them, they're going to be on the same page as you, because for them as well, the business is more interested in the more material parts of the business, the more risky parts of the business. So you'll reach sort of a joint consensus on where you will focus first and where can you put something a little bit later in that journey, back to Hema's point from earlier.
Okay. Hema, what do you think about this challenge here of trying to pull all of this perspective together?
First thing I do is I breathe. I'm like, oh, I feel seen. This has been the most frustrating part of my job in all the years I've done this, is just how do you operationalize these things with these legacy systems and data? I mean, you're spot on. If one system takes, name, street address, and country, and another one takes name, county, and country, you're screwed. You can't analyze that data. So it's that simple when it comes to the quality of the data. And gosh, don't even start on data quality before we get to the rubbish in, rubbish out piece. But it's okay. I'm breathing because I feel seen with the problem. Now, the solution, of course, is not simple. Ideal state, integrated risk management. Absolutely. Everything gets into one place. And I know great CTOs, chief technology officers, are trying. They're trying very hard to clear the sweep. I feel sorry for our vendor friends, honestly, quite frankly, because you're all out now. We need to find one thing that we can put together. The only way you're surviving, I think, and that you'll tell me this, Nick, is integrations, APIs, plugins. You've got to find a way to talk to each other, right? That's the future when it comes to this, number one. But until we get to one tool, you need to make some great friends in your IT department. You need radical empathy with them as well. You also need to think, I know we want to get to the data map, but you want to think about how you can work with what you've got, right? So I 100% think what Ali said is right. Risk-based approach. You can't burn every bridge and you can't do everything. But you can learn a little bit about where the controls can sit in each of these systems, right? Whether it's a just-in-time notification or another drop-down that says government official as opposed to non-government, whatever it is you're trying to do, the functionality in each of these tools can help you. And that is part of your documented good faith journey. Yes, in a future that I hope comes soon, we'll be integrated and we'll have one place. But on the back end, in the meantime, don't be afraid of digging in and asking about the functionality. I sit in vendor calls now with my business stakeholders to learn about the functionality of the tooling they're bringing on, to see, firstly, what controls are their other customers using? Secondly, what have they got that they know about? What else can I ask for that they will very willingly put on their product development map for me? So this time next year, they've got the control in that tool. That's easier than convincing my stakeholders internally to change tool.
100%. And I read a study on like B2B SaaS software recently, and it said like the average user utilizes something like 27% of like the functions. So like there's a ton of stuff probably in the tools that you have. One, two, you have to solve for outcome. Like all of these tools, coding, all this stuff is so democratized now. Like you can do so much stuff in Google Sheets, for example, the same functionality as in, Office. So like there's ways to cobble things together to get it moving and like refine it along the way. I think I've seen a lot of people just try to do this like silver bullet type of a thing, and they end up not even utilizing all the functionality. And so they're kind of back stuck where they were at. That's one thing. The second thing is this. This is a broad brushstroke, so you can take this to the bank. Our industry seems to follow kind of MarTech by like 3 to 5 years. So this data problem exists in every other department in your organization. So MarTech, marketing tech, sales tech, there's so many different data pools that salespeople and sales teams and marketing teams have to pull together in order to do their job. And so those tools, those B2B SaaS tools, are really kind of on the cutting edge of most of the like innovations in terms of SaaS. And it's all connectivity. Like this is not 5 years ago where everybody was just on one monolith of Salesforce. Most all, marketing departments and sales teams, they have a whole, bouquet or like a whole like, constellation of these different tools, and they all connect. And so I'm saying that functionality is making its way finally into where we're at. But this is a problem that is only going to multiply, I think, because we have more tools working their way in. These different industries are in different cycles. So different departments are getting a different sort of mix of tools coming in. And now we're moving from like data pools to like data ponds to like data puddles. I don't know. And we have to be able to like pull those things together. So usually with some kind of a basic Excel skill, access to some kind of a data pool, you can pull that stuff together. But again, it's going to start with those relationships and understanding where those data are,
Nick, let me ask you this question here, because you got me thinking. I do think that sort of data overload is too much of a problem, too many different types of data from too many different systems. And some people in the chat were saying you need a data analytics team to help you out with that. And I agree. But 5 years from now, will AI have essentially solved this, that it's going to do the data synthesization and transformation to something useful? Can you give us a glimpse of how much are we going to struggle with this today versus 2030?
So in my opinion, like I'm putting together this presentation, and the entire presentation is taking a bunch of case management data and leveraging ChatGPT to like make the board report, to do the insights, to do the data cleaning, to figure out where the fluctuations are. And it's a bunch of that front end work that it's, to take, it basically turns the data into information that we as human beings can start to figure out which rocks to look under and so forth. And like we are at the infancy stages of this thing. So I think very quickly, a lot of the, the sort of transition from like data to actual information that we can start to take action on, I think the velocity of that is going to be like greatly increased. That time's going to be totally compressed.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to narrow this question just a little bit more, because I had been thinking for a while about all the different types of data you're getting from across the enterprise. But is it also just true that even within the compliance function, You got a bunch of different systems and a bunch of different data, which is not necessarily easy to cobble together into a simple report so you can understand where are we strong, where are we lagging, and I can now convey this to the board at the meeting next week. How much is there also just a data confusion problem even within the compliance function itself? Ali, what would you say to that?
I guess I'm lucky a little bit in that I last worked for an enterprise resource planning company. So at the end of the day, we had a limited number of systems. Where we had challenges is maybe similar to the previous question, integrating acquisitions, right? And you get a lot of disparate systems from those structures. But even there, I think the way you structure your team can help in part as well. Like, if you are a compliance function and you don't have a separate group focused on M&A, if you're doing a lot of acquisitions, you're doing yourself a disservice. And when you set that organization up or that individual up in your organization, you need to make sure that you enable them and keep them in the loop on what information you're looking as the chief compliance officer or as a team to report into the audit committee, into the compliance committee. So it's doable. I think I'm just privileged in that I've worked in an organization that hasn't had as many data silos as maybe other organizations.
See, that's cheating, but you raise good points anyway. Hema, what would you say to this?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Let's focus on the ethics and compliance function and what we do with our data and our risk management data. And I have worked in all sorts of organizations, so I can't cheat here. I can tell you that I've seen it all. I've worked in 3 governments. I worked for the United Nations. I've worked for 3 companies, big and small, and I've been from startup to the most, Disney is one of the most established. There is a lot of stuff being collected in a lot of places. At the most basic level, are you getting your things through email and Slack and ticketing systems and databases and forms and spreadsheets? If you're taking it all in everywhere, that sounds like fun. You're giving lots of options, but you don't even know what you've got, let alone how to analyze it and draw conclusions. Sometimes you like to just rip the page off and start again. There's nothing wrong with that, actually. There's nothing wrong with designing it in a way that it will work for you going forward and then dealing with the cleanup later. You can talk to an audit committee about what happened last year and you can start collecting the data for next year. That can happen. So I sometimes think, don't be paralyzed by the magnitude of the problem. Start thinking about what you want. Again, what impact do you want? Another question, I know this isn't what you asked, but what are you reporting to the board anyway? Have you been collecting data for years that you don't even need to report to them? So stop messing around in that field and start anew. What is impactful? And collect that information. So I work at Zendesk, which is a customer service software, and they have a ticketing system that they sell for customer service. Started to use that myself for the ethics and compliance function. So everything comes in through a compliance or legal front door. You as an employee go to one place to ask your questions about anything. At the back end, it gets triaged out to the right place. So the data starts now going where it needs to, even though it's housed in one place. Then you've got your knowledge bank in there as well, right? You've got everything in there, the ticketing, the knowledge. And then you can start taking from those inputs information about what the frequently asked questions, what's not working, what impact are you having. I just had a conversation with Margarita Deralanco at Ivy Health. She just won an award. I think it was the GRC
She's awesome.
Global.
Yeah, she's something else.
GRC World Forum Award for innovation in compliance. And what she did was this. She took a ticketing tool and she put in a drop down for her team to say, what impact did they have when they answered this question? Oh. And so they can actually show their impact through data. Now, she only had, when she first probably went to the board, she only had like 140 inquiries, but still she can show of the 140, 50% of them helped growth with sales, unlocks employee relations, whatever it might be, she was able to show it. So I would say, I'm sure there are some smart people that know what to do with the various silos that we've created. But if you're in that situation, you don't have to do that. You could just start now with what impact is, start collecting data. I was scared that I might not have too much data in the first 3 months, but you got to start somewhere. And guess what? In 6 months, I had more. And in 9 months, I had more. And by the end of the year, I had a story to tell, not just about the impact. I want to go back to Margarita. One of her goals was not just impact and board reporting. Another goal was, I want my compliance team to feel useful and proud of what they achieve each day. And just that exercise of checking the drop down of what impact they had by that inquiry helped them understand their value. let alone now they can tell the rest of the world, the business, the board, the GRC World Forum. You know, it's magical. And at the beginning of the conversation, she said to me, Hema, innovation is simple. It's the most simple thing. I'll give you, I know, Nick, you'll love this. I'm going to give you this example that she gave me. She said basketball was an innovation. At one point, they used to throw a ball in a net and it would stay there. And you would take the ball out and you would bring it back. Somebody decided to cut the bottom off the net so it would come back through. Right? Incredible example of how simple it can be to have innovation and move forward. So let me use Margarita's metaphor. Do not be afraid to cut the net when it comes to all that stuff you've got. Cut the net, create a new game. You've not lost the old data. You can play with that all day. Hire your data analyst to tidy that up. But in the meantime, what did you say? Keep moving forward, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to build anything massive without like moving fast and breaking stuff. Like you can build something massive over maybe many lifetimes, but like we have to let go. And I mean, she just kind of jumped into this pool and look at what happened. And I'll say one other thing. I mean, you said everything that I would like to say, except for you said like, now I have a story to tell. Whether you have 20 tickets that came through or 150 cases that came through, you now have something to talk about. You have anecdotes that can be representative of, you know, this hypothesis. It just gives you so much more fodder. It just gives you so much more kindling to like light this fire in your organization, you know?
So somebody else here had written in, what was their exact way that they phrased it? How often should you do a gap analysis in situations like this? And it kind of leads into another area of questions I wanted to ask, was more, again, about the practical challenges here of you have to guide all of this remediation work. And, you know, it's assigning tasks and making sure that they've been done and escalating them to the supervisor if the assignee hasn't done it. And you have to know, therefore, that they're late. And I was wondering how difficult it can be just to simply track the work and make sure you know what isn't getting done so you know how to turn up the volume until it does. Ali, what do you say to those kind of challenges as well? Like what works? Is this a IT system process challenge for you, or is it more about having good relationships, or are you going to say both or whatever? I don't know. But what about that dimension of remediation work?
I think it's definitely both, Matt. But I'm going to position also that when we talk, for instance, about, you know, having an appropriate compliance organization, you know, we often talk about having lawyers and maybe accountants and auditors, or, you know, maybe people from law enforcement backgrounds. That's all wonderful. But when we're talking also about remediation, it's really important that you've got project management discipline inside your organization as well, right?
Great point.
I've worked with a lot of like compliance professionals in my career who don't naturally gravitate towards that skill set. There are some who do, but hire people with, you know, project management expertise in your organizations, and ones who are maybe historically close to the business as well, because they will also then help you remove those obstacles and those silos. Back to the second half of your question, the systems are very important too, and they can help you, but it can get addressed even in an application like Microsoft Project. You don't need something extremely complicated as a starting point. Definitely, there are some wonderful solutions out there for the mid to long run, but hire the right people with the diverse skill set, and also then leverage some technology to get you to the end.
Okay, so Hema, talk to me about this, but I love Ali's point that you need somebody who is well-versed in project management, which is an art unto itself, and many of us do not know it. But what would you say about this, you know, tactical challenge?
Well, so you know what the people that are well-versed in project management are good at doing? They're good at bringing people together to do stuff, right? So sorry, it's back. Togetherness is back in the room. So it's the GSD that gets stuff done, right? And that's the narrative. That's what you need to show. If remediation is about activities, and of course it is in some respects, right? You need to show progress on those activities. Tasks are checked. Controls are actually happening. I mean, you wrote a beautiful article just today about a case, Quinity, where in the round, a good control was in place apparently, but people weren't actually just doing the thing, right? Right? They weren't doing the thing, and then to fix it, they still have to do some things. And I keep saying they, because you know what? It's not you, the compliance team. Sorry, it's not you, right? Your only job is to coach and facilitate this thing happening. There's very little that you can remediate at scale on your own in these lean, mean teams. So you do need to influence the business, the relevant business or teams, whoever it is. Even if you have to hire new ones, you still got to influence them to do the thing. So 100% agree with you, Ali. Project management is the thing. Absolutely started to use, I've used everything from smart sheets to Monday. Now I start seeing, vComply is another good one that comes out and helps you assign specific tasks in the control. I learned a lot from my cybersecurity teams where they had big control lists to get operationalized, and they had to assign them to the business owners, and they had to follow up with them. So absolutely project management. But yeah, it's getting stuff done. It feels like a behemoth task. And what have we said? Break it down into little tasks, assign responsibility, accountability, follow through, make sure it's working, make sure it's relevant, and get the buy-in from the people that have to do it before you give them the list.
It's funny. Here's somebody else writing in. I am good at project management. That's why compliance got thrown at me. So reassuring.
Well, you found your home. Good job.
Yeah. Nick, tell us a little bit more here about what you see for some of these like tactical challenges of just double checking everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to do it.
Man, it's just so hard. I think it's been multiplied. The complexity has been multiplied, obviously, from the work from home, situation. And I think there's an interesting example kind of going on in the chat. People have been talking about companies restricting ChatGPT. This is just a great example. And I have several friends I've had conversations with where their company has restricted it and they work from home. And so they just put their personal laptop next to it. They do their work on ChatGPT, they bring it over, and boom. So there's this saying in remediation that water finds a way, water will always find a way into your house or through a crack, and people are the same way. If there's a benefit out there for them, despite some control, they're going to find a way around it. So I think it's really a question of, like Ali said, of materiality and flexible anti-fragile tripwires to the extent you can put them in place to see where, a hypothesis is being violated. I expect X kind of behavior. I expect this in the data, and it's falling outside of, kind of a relevant range. That should set off some type of a red flag or some type of a notification to check whether that control is actually, sufficient or even being followed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to change gears a little bit again. And Hema, maybe I'll start with you this time because you've worked for a regulator before. You've worked on the corporate side before. But I want to get back to something we touched on earlier on what are you actually telling the boss, whether that's a regulator or the board or both? What are you reporting to them about the progress you're making? Mm-hmm. And in a typical DPA, I would see something like the team has to make submissions to the Justice Department every year, or maybe they're having meetings every quarter, or they're certainly having meetings with the board every quarter. What should you be telling them, as you said before, to demonstrate that we're not just going through actual motions and running around, we're making real progress? So what should be going into those kind of reports? Like, where do you find that information, and what would you advise people to think about?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So look, the first place you find it is your outside legal counsel. Let's be clear. Do not do this on your own. Go get your lawyer. They will be better than me at telling you what they think you should do. Heed their advice. That said, again, I'm not talking for the SEC, but I'll talk for myself. I'm Hema, and I was a prosecutor at the SEC. What does that tell you? It's just real people like me, right, that need to be persuaded that you're making a good faith effort, right? There's no checklist or scores. In fact, I think we know nobody wants a checklist anymore because it's not impactful, it's activities. So how are you going to convince your mum, right, or your spouse that you did something meaningful since you learned your lesson or something went wrong? What did you do when something went wrong? How did you respond to crisis? And how did you believe in a sustainable way forward to keep moving forward? That sounds very airy-fairy. Okay, let's get more concrete. But I see your face. You're like, yeah, Hema, but come on, what do I write in the presentation? I think you have to have a strategy, an impactful strategy. I think you have to show a journey. Be reasonable. You're not going to get there in 3 years. They may have given you 3 years, but maybe it's going to take you 5. I trust you more if you tell me that than you pretend that it's going to take you 3, because I'll just say, good, I'll see you in 3 years then. You know what's going to happen in 3 years? Recidivist, right? Mm-hmm. So how about you just be honest about what's possible in your company, because your company is your company. It's not the same as the one I prosecuted yesterday or the one I look at tomorrow. I expect you to know your company better than me as a prosecutor, because how would I? Let's think about it. I never worked in a company when I prosecuted for 10 years. What would I know that you couldn't tell me, right? You have to tell me that stuff. So what do we say? Strategy, maturity journey. What were your priorities? You couldn't do everything. Let's be honest. Show me that you took a decision on priorities and tell me what you chose not to do. What is strategy? The art of saying no to a few things.
Yes.
These 10 things are important, but we had to realize that if we wanted to meet our goals, we had to choose the 3 and leave the other 7 for next time. It's okay. It's a business judgment. Just be honest about it. Priorities and then progress on the same. You know what's really compelling when you tell a story about what you want to do? Honesty about your vulnerabilities and the challenges you foresee. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. What are you worried about?
What are you worried about? You're
Share
doing
that.
things.
You know.
And by the way, you're doing it. Can I just be clear? You are not. This is the mistake. You are not doing this for the regulator.
Correct.
I'm going to say you're not even going to do it for your investors or your employees. I'm going to say you're doing it for your own values and ethics and peace of mind. But if that's too lofty, pick someone else. Pick someone else. Don't think you're just checking the regulators' boxes. Who are we? We're just hemmers that work in DC. That's all we are, right? Think about the actual reason for doing this. And I guarantee, that's my theory. If I see that coming across in the presentation, I have more trust in you and more hope for you. I'll stop there.
Ali, what would you say to this?
I just echo everything Hema just said. I think as someone who hasn't worked at a regulator before, I think though a lot of what she's saying is really key for compliance professionals who haven't been in that seat to remember. And what I mean by that is I have sometimes attended on occasion a meeting where, you know, a compliance professional will go to the business, you need to do this or the regulator will be unhappy. And that's absolutely the wrong narrative for us to be having. What we should be saying is, this is the risk we are trying to mitigate. And we think that this is a possible solution, but we're not, again, the business experts like Hema and everyone's been saying up until now. You guys tell me, can we tackle this problem in this way? Or do you have an alternate approach to the solution? And when you do that, I think you will get a more like agreed organization, a more collaborative organization. You'll get good solutions, but back then to the strategic goals for compliance, you also will get things that hit green lights on your dashboards that you're reporting to the board. The milestones will get met. The deadlines will be achieved. Yes, there may be some delays through the journey, and there may be some right turns, left turns, and some failures, but the progress will still be there. So I think it's really, really important that you've got that narrative down well.
Nick, any other thoughts to add on this subject here?
Yeah, I just think be authentic about it. Be real about what you're looking at and don't turn it into a dog and pony show. The thing that I've been struck by talking to Andrew McBride, who won Compliance Week Program of the Year for everything that happened at Albemarle, and that's that phenomenal settlement, is when he talks about what they were doing to fix stuff, he was trying to get himself comfortable with it. It's a puzzle to figure out. It's a problem. You know what I'm saying? It's a riddle. You know what I'm saying? And he seemed to be very open and authentic and transparent about the challenges, the focus on impact, how they were kind of trying to figure it out, sharing the feedback loop of data he was getting or information he was getting to show him that he was on the right track here or on the wrong track there. And I think that authenticity kind of gets conveyed on a kind of a subconscious level to the Hemas on the other side to say like, okay, this person is actually engaged in this. This person is actually trying to figure it out. And I'm starting to see this kind of progress. I think to Ali's point, when we're trying to solve it for the regulators, you end up playing a game that is kind of it's a fake game, you know, like you don't even know the rules of that game. You don't know what they actually care about. And I think if you think, you know, I think everybody here is smart person who cares. If we are trying to solve that for ourselves and we're open to the impasses we're hitting or the knots in the string that we still can't get untied, I think that makes that whole engagement a lot more collaborative. And again, at the end of the day, you're just you're persuading somebody on the other side of the table that what you're doing is driving the impact that they want you to drive, you know?
You know, it's funny. I was even boiling this down to a more base level that this really is about, will the regulators trust you sitting across the table from them that you know what you're doing? And I actually think that to Hema's point and to your point, Nick, about authenticity, if you just go in and say, look, we're going to be able to probably do 70% of this in 3 years, and then we'll get to the rest later on. I think that's much better, I'm guessing, than to come in and say, we are going to be awesome. We will do all things for all people by all deadlines, which is baloney. And everybody knows it. And it really is just about how did the regulators gain trust that you know what you're doing. Somebody here said the regulators will derive their confidence in you from you. And it's really just the same point that's framed in a more succinct way. And so I absolutely do agree with that. So we have a few minutes.
It's not about the activities. It's not about, hey, look at all these activities. It's about you. To Hema's point. I mean, it's so true. It's so true. And I think people can see through it if you're just paying lip service to it. I just think they can see it.
One other point that, Hema, you made about strategy involves saying no to a few things. There is that book out there, The Art of Strategy, which is very thick, and I haven't read the whole thing. But up at the front of it, the author did say strategy is about deciding we will do this, but not this. And anybody who swoops in and says, well, why not both? Because you're an overblown MBA who is just trying to sell services. But that's not what strategy is. Strategy is making a choice. So we have a bunch of questions here, and I'm trying to find some of the good ones. Some people asking about good project management platforms or risk and control matrices for sustainability and whatnot. I don't know if anybody wants to talk more about the importance of specific products like that, and I'm not looking for product endorsements, but just more like, do you need dedicated tools for this, or could you, how would you make do with whatever your budget would allow? I don't know. Ali, do you have any thoughts about this? You kind of touched on project management and the importance of it. What are the tools that you would try to use to support that kind of venture?
Though I said technology is important, I do personally think overblown technology is not important in a situation like this. Look, I've worked in an organization that just had a settlement a few months ago with regulators, and it wasn't the first time it had a settlement with regulators. But getting up until that point was not about using the right project management tool. It was about doing the right work and getting stuff done, right? So there was a lot of reporting. There was a lot of actual activities and specific projects that needed to get done. There was an umbrella of a compliance operations plan that was executed for multiple years with reporting, but it wasn't through some sort of elegant tool. Quite honestly, it was on Microsoft PowerPoint, but it got things done because back to the activities that need to get done, we had a sponsor, we had multiple sponsors, we had lots of project managers, we had people in the business who were accountable for specific actions, and there were milestones at the end of the day that all needed to be tracked. So I don't think a tool is that key. A tool is key, but not a tool that is extremely complicated is key.
And I don't suck at golf because I use my grandfather's golf clubs. I suck at golf because I don't know how to swing a golf club. Like, very rarely is it the tool. You know what I'm saying? It's usually the golfer or the jockey or whatever. To your point, you can solve for that outcome in 1,000 different ways.
Emma, I'm going to sneak in one last question here. If you could answer it maybe briefly, but somebody just wanting to talk a bit more about the importance of connecting ethics and compliance program directly to the business impact. We could do that for a whole hour. I can give you
my favorite question. I'll try and say, I think I answered it in the text, so I'll answer it here. Be the office of unlock means unlocking business opportunity that's responsible. So there's nothing you do that shouldn't be connected to the business, quite frankly. If you're still talking about the regulators, you've missed the point. We're supposed to be unlocking responsible business. So don't think you're anything but that. There's no opportunity without risk. It just doesn't exist. So if you're too risk averse, you're not doing opportunity. And if you're there helping mitigate risk, you're helping with business. I'll leave it there.
Well, Hema Lomax and Ali Ikram, you guys both gave us plenty to think about today. This has been a great session. And Nick, I'll let you wrap it up and take it home for everybody.
All right. Thank you all. Next week, we got one more round of applause for this. I mean, what a freaking panel today. I mean, I love Thursdays. This is such a shot in the arm for me to remind me of why what we do matters so much. So I know everybody who's here is probably spread thin and carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Don't forget that what you're doing matters. Don't forget that small tweaks to what you're doing can unlock a ton of impact. I want to give you a quick little preview for the next couple of weeks. It's on here somewhere. I dropped it into the chat. We have Rebecca Rem next week talking about metrics that matter, culture metrics that matter. So really kind of diving into what metrics can we use to show the effectiveness of our culture. And then the one and only on September 5th, the one and only Christian Hunt. One of my favorite guys ever, compliance everywhere, lessons from everyday life. So if you do not follow these guys on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. Definitely follow our panelists on LinkedIn. And we hope to see you all next week. And thank you for joining. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.